Hi, everyone. Welcome to our presentation titled UX Best Practices for a Dashing Dashboard. My name is Joe Kim, and I am a senior UX researcher at Grafana Labs. Joining me today is Leah Ueda, the head of UX and research at Grafana Labs, who will be presenting the second half of today's talk. I would also like to acknowledge a third member of our team, Parik O'Callaghan, who is a senior product designer and helped contribute to today's presentation. All three of us on this screen are members of the UX team at Grafana Labs, comprised of designers and researchers focused on making the user experience of our products as delightful as possible. Okay, so why are we here today? Well, if you're someone who creates dashboards, alerts, visualizations, anything in Grafana that's used by people other than yourself, well, congratulations, you're doing UX. So today we're here to share tips on how to use key UX design and research activities that will help make sure you're meeting your stakeholders' needs, as well as providing them with useful and delightful experiences. Whether you're strategizing on what you need to create, executing on an idea, or evaluating the success of something you've already created, there's a UX method that can help. And we'll teach you how to apply design and research principles in your work that we use as we develop products at Grafana Labs. So I would like to start off by introducing the design thinking method. Design thinking is a process for creative problem solving. It's an approach typically applied in a design thinking workshop that anyone, not just designers or researchers, can take to solve a business or creative challenge. And while there are different approaches to the design thinking, depending on who's teaching it, the process typically boils down to the following 5 steps. First, empathize. So who is our audience and what are their needs? Second is define. What is a problem and why is it important? Third, ideate. What are possible solutions? What are the pros and cons of each? Fourth, prototype. How do we create it? And what would delight the audience? And lastly, test. Does it work? What does the audience think? This method is steeped in a deep belief that the end user should be at the heart of all decision making. I would also like to call out that this is a very basic and simplified framework for design thinking. In reality, UX isn't a linear process, and rather it is quite ambiguous. It's a collection of abilities, mindsets, and methods. And you can even say that design thinking itself is a philosophy. So we like to say that it's a human-centered approach to problem solving. So let's go in depth into each of these 5 steps. So the first step, as I mentioned, is empathize. And this step provides an opportunity to set our assumptions aside and immerse ourselves in the context of the problem we're attempting to solve. So the particular problem determines who might find the solution useful, as well as which experts might help shed light on ways the issue is currently being solved. So several approaches can help draw out the information needed to paint a full picture of the problem's context. For example, observing, listening, conducting interviews, conducting a survey. These are all parts of doing research. These are all methods for conducting research and trying to really develop an understanding of your stakeholders and the needs. For example, asking someone to tell a story about the last time they experienced the problem you're investigating, that can provide a rich description that highlights details you might not have otherwise considered. And tools like empathy maps, such as the one you see on this screen, can be a great way to consolidate all the valuable information that you glean from whichever method you chose from the previous slide. Empathy maps capture what people do, say, think, and feel in the context of the problem. And they also provide more than just a way to summarize data. They also help your colleagues understand the context of the problem and how people experience it. So arming everyone with this knowledge helps ensure that the person the solution is intended for is top of mind at all stages of the idea's development. Next, we move on to define. In this step, we combine and analyze the research to draw the insights from the data that will help define our problem statement and guide the third step, which is ideation. So the problem statements should be captured in really human-centered terms rather than just being merely focused on business goals. So for example, a human-centered target would be to help stakeholders find the data they need more quickly and easily in the context of Grafana. Based on the frustrations you may have observed or heard about, you can come up with questions for how you might solve them. So one standard format is to begin with the phrase, how might we, followed by a particular pain point. This is a particularly famous exercise within the UX circle to really help ground us in our users' frustrations and how we might go about approaching a solution. So for example, how might we display alerts in a more visual way? So as you explore the empathy data, focus on identifying patterns and problems across a diverse group of people. Gathering information on how people are currently solving the problem provides clues on how to give a more innovative solution, and learning about frustrations with those solutions serves to identify unmet needs. Another example here that I've introduced to you is the point of view. So we start by defining the person or the type of person you are designing for, your stakeholder. Then you're selecting the most essential needs, which are the most important to fulfill. And remember that needs should be verbs and try to make them actionable. And then lastly, work to express the insights developed through the synthesis of your gathered information. The insight should typically not be a reason for the need, but rather a synthesized statement that you can leverage in your design solution. Here you can articulate your point of view or a point of view by combining these three elements of user, need, and insight as an actionable problem statement that will drive the rest of your design work. And it's surprisingly easy when you insert them into this point of view like Mad Lib sentence. So in this example, let's take an on-call engineer. The on-call engineer needs, for the need, let's say, to be alerted when an incident happens, because, what's a compelling insight here? Because they are responsible for troubleshooting issues in the shortest amount of time. So if I were to read that sentence fluidly, the on-call engineer needs to be alerted when an incident happens because they are responsible for troubleshooting issues in the shortest amount of time. So you can articulate your point of view in this way by inserting your information about your user, the needs, and your insights in a compelling way. Next, we move on to ideate. And the ideation stage marks the transition from identifying problems to exploring solutions. Here, we like to prioritize breadth over depth as we're looking for a diverse range of ideas to prototype and test with real people. So here in this stage, we flow between idea generation and evaluation, but it's important that each process remains separate from each other. So when it's time to generate ideas, do so quickly without focusing on the quality or the feasibility of the idea for now. You never know whether infeasible ideas can inspire someone else. So consider activities such as sketching during the ideation process. It's not necessary to be a skilled artist. As long as you can draw boxes, arrows, stick figures, you can communicate an idea through sketching. And then after ideas are collected, move into the evaluation phase. And this is where you can go around the room and discuss the ideas presented to get clarification if needed. And as you see in this example from our team in one of our brainstorm sessions, one method that we like to do is just to quickly evaluate ideas by voting in a dot vote approach. So each person is provided with a limited number of dot stickers that they place on the idea they think is worth pursuing. And then the top idea or ideas with the most votes or dots move into the next step to be prototyped. So moving on to the prototype stage, prototyping is a quick and easy way to rapidly iterate on concepts. So it allows you to get ideas into physical or digital form to gain feedback from the people they are intended to serve. So the goal is to start with a low fidelity version of the intended solution and improve it over time based on feedback. So Beginning with a few rough sketches on paper will allow you to explore a variety of different concepts quickly and choose the one that will be used. And then once you start to hone in on a single concept or maybe two, then it's time to switch gears to high fidelity mockups. And this will give you a clear idea of what the final design might look like. It can be, as quick and simple as copying screen grabs into a slide deck and playing around with the arrangement to get it right. So there are tools out there like Balsamiq, for example, that can allow you to think creatively and work on multiple concepts in parallel and not be super constrained by the necessary setup and configuration of the design of the system that the design will eventually live in. For example, like hooking up data sources and editing panels is cumbersome if you just want to get an idea of what a potential layout for a dashboard might look like. But here, ultimately, the prototype should be a realistic representation of the solution that allows you to gain an understanding of what works and what doesn't work. It is changed and updated based on feedback from the test phase in an iterative cycle. So speaking of the test phase, we move on to the last step of the design thinking process, test. So think of the test step as an extension of the empathy process. The prototype serves as a conversation starter to gain an even more in-depth understanding of the pain points someone experiences in the context of the problem being solved. So we start by putting our designs in front of our teammates and asking them for feedback. Then, when we're ready to validate our designs, we put the prototype in front of actual people who might use it one day to get their feedback on whether or not it solves their problem. We call this method usability testing. And this is the time to revisit the problem statement and make sure that the end solution that we've come up with is meeting the needs of these people and resolving their frustrations. So by testing, we're seeking to learn if we've made an impact on the way someone feels about the problem at hand. Questions that we ask ourselves are, have we improved upon what already exists? Is our solution compelling enough to change someone's behaviors? So it is important to bear in mind that teamwork is at the base of this entire methodology of design thinking. So multidisciplinary groups can offer different specializations and perspectives. So the idea that there is only one particular domain or area, that's no longer applicable these days. So these techniques will allow you to really leverage the capabilities of the whole group so that everyone can contribute with their expertise and perspective and can add to the collaborative conversation. So in sum, the goal of design thinking is to do the upfront work to validate a solution that addresses a real problem while gaining an intimate understanding of the people who might use it, so that there's a likelihood of a successful product or service in the long run. So next, I'm going to hand it off to Leah, who will talk about how to apply this design thinking methodology to an actual Grafana scenario.
Thank you, Joe, for that great overview of the design thinking process. I'm Leah, and next up, I'll take the framework that Joe shared in the first part of our talk and walk through an example of how you all, as Grafana users and admins, might incorporate it into your work. The scenario that we'll use to think about how design thinking might help you create great experiences for your users is this. Imagine that you've been assigned to a project with the goal of making it easier for new Grafana users in your organization to get started. You might have more users because additional teams are going to use the product, because your existing teams are expanding and growing, or perhaps you have new use cases that you're looking to cover. Some of your new users might already be familiar with Grafana, but it's going to be brand new to some others. The broad question we'll address is this: how might you help new users get started with Grafana quickly and effectively? You'll start out by building empathy and understanding so that you can avoid making assumptions throughout the project. A few quick discussions can help you get a clear picture of where your users are and what their top needs and pain points are. Talk to some of your existing users to understand what is currently working well for them when they're using Grafana. You might also ask them what they remember about their own experience getting started. What was particularly difficult or challenging? Talk to a few new or potential users as well. These conversations should focus on the reasons why they need to use Grafana as part of their work, and they'll give you clarity on the most important jobs to be done. Getting some additional clarity around the level of experience with similar tools is also going to be useful in these chats with new users. That'll help you design a solution that's going to meet your users where they are. Based on your user interviews, you might have a lot of ideas on things that you could do to help your new users get started. Clearly defining the problem that you've set out to address and the primary beneficiary of your solution will help you keep your focus. It will also help you evaluate the success of your work later on. So the example point of view statement that's up on this slide highlights the needs of new Grafana users and gives a short description of why helping them manage the initial complexity of getting started is important. New SREs that are supporting multiple application teams need a wide view across many data types because they are responsible for automating and scaling systems. So with clarity on the problem that you're going to address and for what type of user, you're ready to move on to the ideation phase. It's tempting to jump straight to a solution, but spending a little bit of time exploring possibility is valuable at this stage. The best solution is not always a technical one, and it is worth asking whether the problem you've set out to address could be solved with support materials, a change in existing workflows, or something directly in the app. When you're coming up with ideas, it's okay to focus on quantity over quality at the start. Give yourself a little freedom and space to ignore constraints. Be creative. Your ideas can always be refined and evolve as you work. Sometimes an idea that initially seems impossible has a spark that you can carry forward and find a way to incorporate it into whatever solution you decide to proceed with. For this example, let's say the concept you decide to move forward with is using Grafana's templates and variables to help your new users get started with their dashboards. Instead of hard coding things like server, application, or sensor names into your queries, you can use variables in their place. Variables are displayed as a drop-down list at the top of a dashboard. These drop-downs make it easy for users to change the data that's being displayed in a dashboard. Templates and variables can be especially useful for admins, such as yourself in this scenario, who want to allow Grafana viewers to quickly adjust their visualizations, but don't want to give them full editing permissions. When you're prototyping how you might use templates to give your new users an approachable starting point, you might draft your ideas out in a low fidelity format to start. You don't need to jump straight into the application to begin setting things up. Maybe you'll sketch out a few lists of what variables and values might be useful to include. And you could do this in a spreadsheet, in a Word doc, or even on a whiteboard that you snap a few photos of. Give yourself space to think, be messy, and non-permanent while you're working. Once you have a prototype created, get some initial feedback from your target users before you launch it to a wider audience. When you're doing your initial testing, ask your users to complete a few key tasks. You should have an idea of what success looks like on these tasks before they begin. This is going to help you form an unbiased point of view on how well your prototype is working. Ask your testers to work through the tasks you give them and think out loud. Prompt them to share what they expect to happen as they work through the task and whether those expectations are being met. Depending on how your testing goes, you might end up going back to the drawing board, or you might determine that you're ready to launch. If you discover that your users are struggling and the solution idea is not working out as well in real life as you hoped it would in the design phase, that's okay. It's better to find out that an idea isn't working sooner rather than later. In any case, take what you learned from your test sessions and bring it either to your next round of ideation and prototyping or into the solution that you present to your larger team. A human-centered design process embraces iteration. As you learn more about how your solution works for your users, you can always look at opportunities to iterate and evolve. I hope this scenario resonates with you and helps you see ways that you might incorporate design thinking into your work. It was inspired by a success story that was shared by Wix, a website building platform and Grafana customer. You can learn more about their story on Grafana's blog at grafana.com/success/Wix. There are 3 key points that Joe and I would like you to remember from this session. UX is all about aligning user needs with the solutions that address them. Keep your users at the center of your decisions, and you're going to be in great shape. Design thinking is a problem-solving approach that you can apply in many different contexts. Focus on building empathy and embracing iteration. And flexibility is key. You can take these same 5 basic steps and run through them in a couple days on a small scale effort, or use them as a way to frame up a longer term project. The final thought that I'll leave you with is a quote that I find inspiring from economist Herbert Simon. He wrote, "Everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones." We are all designers. And with that, I thank you for joining this session, and Joe and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your GrafanaCon experience.
Hello, Joe. Hello, everybody. Thanks for watching and joining our session today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Leah, for the nice introduction. And likewise, really excited to answer all of the questions that are in your Q&A.
Fantastic. So people sent in a few during the content that we were sharing. So let's just jump right into the first one. And this question asks, how should we best go about testing dashboards, alerts, or experiences for usefulness? Do you want to take the first stab at that one, Joe?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks Anonymous for sending in this question. So there are several different methods to go about testing your dashboards, alerts, experiences for usefulness. So one would be to actually go out and talk to the users themselves and ask them, how useful are our products serving you, and how well are they meeting their needs. One way you can go about it is actually going and usability testing, part of a journey or an experience that you're really trying to analyze the usefulness of. Another way is to actually embed surveys within the product if you have the capability of doing that, to ask your users and have surface some questions within your product to ask them, how satisfied are you, with this particular product or this particular feature? And that's a great way to get a pulse into how users are experiencing your product, how they're reacting to it. And once you actually collect that data, either through a usability study or through a survey that you do send out to your users, you're able to actually get a good kind of pulse check into how your users are reacting. And that way you can see, how might we be able to improve upon those experiences to make sure that our users are still happy and staying engaged with your particular, in this case, dashboard, alert, or any experience for that matter.
Excellent advice. Let's hop up to the next question. We have one that has a few thumbs up votes on it. So we'll talk about, what does design thinking or usability testing do when end users aren't expert enough to know whether the dashboard solves their problem? Maybe I'll take a crack at this, Joe, and then you can add thoughts after. I think the first thought that comes to me on this question is maybe thinking about shifting the responsibility of knowing what their problem is off of the end user themselves and onto the person who has created this experience, right? So if we're thinking of dashboards or things that one individual has set up in Grafana, by following some of the advice and guidelines from the design thinking process when you're in creation mode, then your users, once they're engaging with the thing that you have created, shouldn't even really have to be consciously thinking about, is this solving my problem? The question of, is it solving my problem, is sort of scooted back in time to at the time you're creating the dashboard for them. So another thing that I would add on that is that when you're thinking about, are users expert enough to know what their problem is, a lot of times it's really hard for people to clearly articulate a problem. And so that's when it might be your job with your researcher hat on to help them understand it and to do a little bit of interpretation and figuring out how best to align the problems and the solutions. Anything you want to add on that one?
Sure. So everything that you said is spot on, Leah. I would also add that the philosophy or the design thinking process is not a linear one. So as you're going from empathize to test, as you're going along the stages, you want to continue to iterate and do your research in the middle processes. And if you find out that your concepts or your dashboards aren't necessarily, resonating with those users who may, have very different ways of experiencing the product, or even their technical expertise may vary. It may force you and your team to take a step back and go back to the empathize and ideate phases of how well do we understand our users? Are there users that we're not thinking about? In this case, maybe let's say we're just focusing on those technical expert users. Are we neglecting what our the non-power users, quote unquote, are experiencing? And so just want to kind of reiterate that it's a constantly iterative process. And it's important for the teams to be okay with taking a step back and doing a bit more internal reflection and thinking about we are trying to understand our users better than our users are trying to understand, or assume that they have to know what the solution is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Next up, we have a question that has a few thumbs up on it. How do I know too much is too much? Looking for best practices to avoid overloading the dashboard. And one of the first things that comes to mind for me on this question is just some human-computer interaction theories and knowledge about cognitive load and how much can the human brain and the human eyeball take in at one time. There's a I think at this point in time, a little bit controversial rule of 7 that people have talked about, where our short-term memory and our ability to process things in the short term is 7 plus or minus 2. So that's a bit of a range, I understand. But if you're trying to ask people to actively engage with dramatically more than 7 things, or they're probably not going to be able to do it with much success. So I'd say that that's a little bit controversial, just because it's a theory that I think was sort of gained popularity in the field of HCI in the 1950s. And so we're always learning more. We're always evolving our understanding. But if you want a number to use as a guideline, don't put more than 7 key pieces of information on a screen at once. Another thing that's important to think about is the density of information. And that's something that it could be a nice opportunity to do some usability testing on, where you could create an example dashboard and then get a few pieces of feedback on it. Are people able to comprehend the key things that you want them to? Is there just too much going on the screen? I think your users are the best experts on that. And even though I did just give a number for the sake of conversation, I think it is very subject to the direct feedback of your users.
I will plus one to that, and I will add that there is no right number. Or when you say, or when you ask how much is too much, it's for you to go about and actually explore by conducting their research and understanding what pieces of information are most important for your users so that they can accomplish their particular goals or tasks. And that will give you a clearer picture as to how many pieces of information should we surface at a given time. And it may change from one context to another. So it really depends on who are your users, what are their goals, what are they trying to accomplish while they're in these dashboards, what pieces of information are going to be the most actionable ones so that they can actually accomplish their goals.
All right. Well, we've got a few more questions in the chat, but we are coming to the end of our time together today. So I think we'll have to wrap up at this moment. But if you like talking to UX folks and learning about usability, we are always looking for people to participate in our research studies. So you can stay tuned to the community Slack channel or talk with any of your Grafana connections about how you might participate in UX research activities that Joe and I and the rest of our colleagues on the UX team are working on. Thank you for joining us and have a good day.
Thank you all.